Hi folks. So up till now we've been learning lots of bits and pieces. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start putting those pieces together. We're going to see how output, along with other key variables, such as the interest rate and also money, are kind of jointly determined. So let's unpack some of what I just said there. First of all, we never want to forget that the economy is a dynamic place. It's in motion all the time. Things are always happening. Economic events, disturbances, changes in people behavior, changes in their beliefs or their expectations. Economists have a kind of general name for those kinds of events. They call them shocks. We call them shocks. I'm an economist. Now, when one shock occurs in one area of the economy, one sector, shall we say, it's quite possible that other things change elsewhere in the economy. For example, if we start off in the households may cut their spending, but that spending cut will ultimately have impacts elsewhere, including on firms' spending. Now, when I mention of this, you may be thinking about what might happen. For example, if you threw a pebble in a pond, you see the initial impact, and then you see ripple after ripple after ripple, until ultimately the ripples do get smaller and they eventually die out. Well, that's exactly the metaphor that you should be thinking of, because what happens in one sector, let's think once again, in this case, an initial downturn of household spending, it's going to ripple through the economy, a sequence of impacts where others also reduce their spending. We'll be showing you a very simple but a useful tool. Some call it the Keynesian cross, after the great economist John Maynard Keynes, which captures that very insight. And there's a message here, one of the key messages that Professor Keynes gave us, and that is that the initial shocks can be magnified or multiplied. So that is, when we start off with an initial reduction of spending, say $100, the overall final impact on the economy as a result of these ripple or knock-on effects can be more than that $100. Okay, so the key insight here is that that initial shock can be amplified, it can be made bigger, it can be multiplied. And in fact, we'll be developing a tool to find out just how much that shock is amplified, and we'll call it the Keynesian multiplier. But wait, there's more. We're going to have to factor in money markets and the interest rate. So it shouldn't be surprising to you that the interest rate has a role to play in this story of putting the macro economy together into a short-run equilibrium. Even before you came to this class, you probably recognized, for example, that when the interest rate goes up, you're probably going to spend less. It's more expensive to borrow, so you may not take out that loan for that car, and businesses might not be so eager to make that next expansion. So if interest rates are low by contrast, it's going to be cheaper to borrow, and that's when the spending spigot tends to open up more. Okay, well, it turns out that your intuition about spending and interest rates is going to be borne out. It's correct. It's going to be summarized in something that we call the IS curve. It's one of these key tools that we'll be learning. And you'll see why we call it that. It's basically because investment is equal to savings anywhere along that curve. You'll also see that there's a direct route from the Keynesian cross to the IS curve, and we'll take you right along that route. But we have to recognize that everything happens at once. So we have to also pin down what that interest rate is, how it is determined. Now, there's a number of ways that we're going to be thinking about the interest rate in this course. Our loanable funds model, for example, we argued that it was a good way to think about the interest rate in the long run. However, when we talk about the short run, there are elements of the money market and the money supply and demand that are going to be critical for those fluctuations in the interest rate in the short run. Here's how are money and interest rate related? Well, think about it like this. The equilibrium interest rate we're going to find is the one that clears the money market. It's the one interest rate at which the demand for money, that is the demand for the liquidity services. Remember, we argued that money makes our life easier, providing us liquidity that we can spend. We're going to call that L, and that's exactly equal to the supply of money that central banks provide, and we'll call that M, liquidity, L, money, M. We're going to get put those together, and we get what is known as the LM curve. The LM curve tells us about the interest rate from the perspective of money markets. So we're going to put goods markets, IS curve, and LM money markets together, and we're going to get a model, and it's called the ISLM model, and that model is a workhorse economist for macroeconomists. It tells us the sort of the joint determination in the short run, a short run equilibrium where the interest rate and output is going, and it's going to be very, very useful to talk about all those shocks and what those shocks mean for the economy. Look, we've got a lot of work here, so let's get going. Thanks a lot.